Thanks for joining us. This is the first Waterways Arts podcast, and I'm joined here today with Kate Saffin and Heather Wastie from Alarum Productions. I first met Kate and Heather in 2017, where we toured over 60 waterside venues on a traditional iron coal boat with a double bill featuring work about the women who worked on the waterways during the war. Kate and Heather, tell me a little bit about how you two both met and what brought you to understand that you have this mutual love of the waterways.
One word, Twitter.
Okay. How did you discover that you were both into canals? What led you to talk about that?
Well, I was doing a performance, wasn't I, relating to canals, and Kate found my tweet. And yeah, go on, you carry on.
Well, I'd finished my master's in writing at drama school in London and was thinking about what to do. And I decided I was time to get moving and perhaps go travelling. So, and I was actually looking at Ellesmere Port Museum and thinking about taking a trip to the Waterways Museum, perhaps collecting stories on the way, and came across work that they'd already programmed for Easter, which included Heather. And so I thought, oh, it was interesting. And so I sent her a tweet, which I didn't even use very much at the time. I mean, clearly there was some greater force at work here, because within minutes she'd replied and pointed me to YouTube with Idle Women and Judy's, which was the audio piece she'd done. And I tweeted back and said, oh, I've written a solo play about the trainees. And she said, that sounds interesting. So I emailed it off thinking, well, if she likes it, we could do a double bill. And about a week later, she emailed and said, I really like it. We could do a double bill.
I forgot to mention, we travelled around one of the old cargo routes from London up to Birmingham and Coventry and back on the traditional boat. When did that come in?
It came in, we met in 2016. We did our first show in April, having met in February. We did a sort of a preview in London, and then we immediately did 2 short tours. One in the sort of spring, summer of 10 shows, which worked well. So we did another 10 in the autumn. And this was gradually amassing material on my side, because I hadn't actually written all that much on the subject of, they're known as the idle women. So I was writing more material. We were working out how we could fit them together as a double bill, self-contained double bill. And then Kate came up with this really obvious, but not obvious, idea of actually doing shows along the route, because the idea was that we would tour the show along the canals, do it at the canal side venues. So Kate had this idea that we would follow the route that the women worked during the war and do shows en route, and that was the one that you, Zoe, were the tour manager for. Mm-hmm. So we did 50 shows in 15 weeks, and we couldn't have done it if you hadn't managed it.
It was an awful fun.
And it was made very special by being able to work with an historic boat, Tench, owned by a woman. Sadly, Alex Bennett has since died, and I just think that tour, apart from everything we did following the route of the wartime trainees, so we were able to tell some of their stories in places where they happened. That was one of the really nice things about it. But also, it's because of the tour and taking part and the film that Erin Hopkins, another wonderfully talented boatwoman, made, it's also actually ended up as a lovely tribute to Alex and her love and passion for the canals.
Yeah, absolutely. And that love and passion for the canals is so apparent, and was so apparent. I wasn't able to join you both for the entire tour, but part of being able to travel with the boat and to go to these venues and kind of replicate the work that women had done meant that I personally felt that I learned an awful lot about how hard it must have been for these women to do that at the time. So talking of the work that people do on the canals, I know that you've recently completed I Dig Canals. Can you tell me a little bit more about what happened in that project?
Well, I think Heather should start that one,
Heather.
Because this one grows out of her family's involvement. So we were talking about where to go next, and the obvious is, well, who were the next lot of women after the trainees? And over to you, Heather.
Okay, well, the next lot of women were actually the women that were involved in setting up the Inland Waterways Association, which was set up in the, well, post-war, because by that time the canals were in decline. And a little bit after that, in the 60s, my family was actually involved in carrying on that work, because a lot of the canals were really in a terrible, derelict state when I was a child. And so I was part of the campaign to restore them in the Black Country where I'm from. And I feel so passionate that people need to know that the canals are there now, but had it not been for this band of people, they might not be. And so, yeah, that's where the idea of the I Dig Canals project came from. And we told, well, we're not telling the story so much yet. We've done a lot of research, speaking to women who were there. So mostly what we do, Kate and I, as Alarum, is to tell the stories of women.
Mm.
We recognise there is a huge gap because we know what the men were doing, but we didn't know so much about what the women were doing. But we do now.
But we do now.
And what is that you're holding there, Heather?
I am holding the I Dig Canals celebratory book, which is full of little stories and photographs and poems and history. And it features mainly these women here who allowed us to interview them. There are 19 women there, including me, actually. I didn't interview myself, but I am part of the audio archive, which will be going to the Waterways Archive when they reopen.
And I believe is available online at your SoundCloud account.
Absolutely. Alarum Theatre is on SoundCloud, and we've produced 15 podcasts between, well, they're mostly about 20 minutes long. There are some shorter ones too.
About that. And most feature the voices of the women we interviewed and their stories and the way they tell them with various different themes. Two of them, which I did, go back to that very beginning bit in 1945, because there's a lot of history about the beginning. There was a literary agent called Robert Aikman who wrote to Tom Rolt, who is famous for writing a book called Narrowboat, having travelled around the system just as the war began. And they're always credited with the start of the IWA, but actually they were both married. Their wives, Ray Aikman and Angela Rolt, plus the first employee of the Inland Waterways Association, Elizabeth Jane Howard, who was a novelist. Those three did a huge amount of work at the very beginning, which isn't really, it gets a mention, but there's lots of wonderful stories. And in the National Archives at Kew are a lot of Angela's letters. So we've been able to bring some of those to light and share them. And that's been great fun.
Amazing. So one of the things that I know is very important to you guys is collaboration and mixing things up and working with other people. What is it that you find so exciting about that, and what does that enable you to do?
I think when you work a lot with one other person, actually it brings a lot if you can also both work with other people. It brings something new into it, because we could very easily fall into a kind of sort of slightly formulaic, neat way of doing things that's easy and comfortable. But I think it's challenging to go out and work with others. One of the things I've done is to work with another, because we're going to come on to talking about the Waterways Arts Collective, but another company in that is Bonnet and Belt, Phil Underwood. And we collaborated last year on developing a musical for children based on one of the Muddy Waters canal stories, Midsummer Millie. And that was a fantastic experience because we worked with different actors, we worked with a composer, a musical director. Well, actually the composer was the musical director, but and in a show aimed at children. So still rooted in the canal, still rooted in the heritage, but a different audience, a different style. I hadn't written lyrics before. And that was great. And some of that will no doubt inform ideas of things that Heather and I go on to do.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you said, Kate. You don't need to worry. I do agree. But I think also
I was trying to get away from you.
I'd like to say how we work together, because we haven't really talked about that. I mean, it's Katie writes scripts, and she's brilliant at performing loads of characters one after the other. She'll turn to the left and she's one character, she'll turn to the right and she's another, and you know exactly who the character is and where she is. So her half of the show has been based on that, and then my half has been poems and songs. And audiences invariably say that the two complement each other. So with the Idle Women, by the time they've seen the whole show, they know loads and loads of things. So it's not like they've seen one half and, oh, we know it now, we don't need to see the other half. Each of us brings something unique to the performance.
So I mean, it's really exciting what you're saying with the collaboration, because it means that you're able to bounce off other people and become a whole greater than the sum of its parts. And that's something that I've seen in the work you've done and the projects you've produced, and it is a really exciting thing. And I think we're going to touch on that a little bit more in a second and talk about Waterways Arts and why we've started this up and what we want to achieve with it. But just very quickly, I'd love to just chat to Heather quickly about your project Boston News and how collaboration has worked for you in that.
Yes, this is a project which I'm just coming to the end of. It's organised by Creative Black Country, and I was, it's a bit complicated, but basically I have been commissioned to create 2 pieces, and I've also been able to commission 3 other artists to create pieces which relate to water. And they're collaborative. Within each commission, it's collaborative. So for instance, there's a singer-songwriter who is also an artist, and he works with a community group in Walsall, and he's been working remotely with them recently, obviously because of lockdown. But a year or 2 ago they visited a local reservoir, and it was a beautiful, tranquil place, and they found it very soothing, and thinking back to that now, they find it a beautiful place. So he wanted to write a song about that place, and so he created a song using words from the group, photographs they took at the time, and art, and he's produced this video of the song, collaborating with all those art forms. So that's one way. I'll give you one more example. I have written a sequence of poems which sort of fit together about a location on the Dudley Canal, and I've worked with a visual artist who has read the poem, been to the same places, and created some art which is inspired both by the place and by my poems. And then I am now going to produce a video where I record the sound of my voice speaking the poems, and then her art will be there too. And all of this will be in a newspaper as well.
Amazing.
So we're inspiring each other, and just talking to the visual artist, we bounced off each other really well. And part of one of my poems is talking about the reflection underneath the bridge, and she's reflected that in her art, and you find in new dimensions that you wouldn't otherwise find if you're just working on your own.
Absolutely. And speaking of new dimensions, Waterways Arts, which is the group that we've started up, and the company that we're going to be producing work kind of through under the limit of, the whole philosophy of this is about connecting people and about being able to respond to the water, and as you say, to kind of have that reflection back into what we're doing and expand the prospects of that. And I know for myself, one of the really exciting things about the group is part of the ability to connect different people together and make it a wider platform and expand what work people are able to do. What for you, I mean, I think Kate's probably more relevant, what for you is the thing that's really exciting about seeing these connections form?
I think it was, I don't think it was during the 2017 tour, I think it was 2018, and we were at Braunston Marina for the historic boat show. And it was, I can remember it was a conversation standing in the car park outside the beer tent with writer and boatwoman Janel Stormtug, and Phil Underwood of Bonnet and Belt, and just talking about how hard it is. There's so much interest in doing things and performing on the waterway. Quite a lot happening in and around London, but not, if you're a small company, it's quite hard. You know, we found that when having you to help tour manage has been an absolute godsend, because there's a lot of work in making those links and relationships and bookings. And we started thinking about how great it would be if we could all help each other out. So we could, I mean, it's the collaborating and making work, but just the sheer practicalities of being able to say, does anybody know these 3 venues? What are they like? Who do I contact? That kind of useful intelligence. And so we started in a small way by sort of inviting everybody we could think of. We organised a meeting which the Canal and River Trust kindly supported by offering us a room space in their offices in Milton Keynes. And we invited the person who's probably got the most experience in touring anything on the waterways, which is Marianne McNamara from Micron Theatre, because of course they've been touring for nearly 50 years. And she's got a wealth of, she hasn't been doing it for 50 years, she came in a bit later, but they've got a wealth of experience. So she came and we had this really interesting discussion. And it's lovely that she's actually going to join us in helping to select our first call out, our full first commissions. Then we went on to organise a little bit more training in fundraising, but it was difficult to actually get moving. And what's great at the moment is that we do have some funding from the Arts Council as part of their emergency funding to keep Waterways Theatre alive, and that we're able to start to really move things forward. And just make, even some of the examples the group's coming up with are things I'd never thought of doing. You know, just, so I think that's exciting to see what people are coming up with that, you know, fuddy-duddy old me might never have thought of.
It's a really good point you make about sharing resources. It's not just about collaborating to make work. It's also about having that, I want to say, safety net of being able to ask for help and to get good advice and to just have that community where you
making it happen.
Yeah.
You know, all the brilliant ideas in the world aren't any good if you can't actually turn them into work and take them to share with people.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that is really important about this project. It's about making things happen. It's about seeing more work happen, about being able to support the kind of the new kids coming in to help them make work, and to just encourage more work to be made, responding to the waterways, embracing the history of the canals, and just sort of understanding.
That's really important.
Yeah, I was going to say embracing the history is really important, because in our travels, Kate and I have seen companies that are perhaps trying to do something different at their venue, and they will bring in someone who suddenly becomes an actor and has got all the history wrong. And it would just be so nice to be able to have a body of people who actually know more about the history, so that the stories that are being told are more authentic and not just based on folklore.
And it doesn't mean that everything has to be about the heritage at all. The world has always shifted and changed and had new ideas. But the heritage and the history of the canals and the stories are so rich that I find it difficult to find the words for it, but it's somehow wanting to keep our feet in that world, so that even if something is entirely new and modern and looking forward, that it still has that link and that recognition. You know, if you're perhaps setting something around, it's only to work and think it's an example of perhaps setting something around a lock or historic building, you don't have to go into detail about what the building was there for, but you need to treat it with respect. You need to recognise that it's had this long history before you came along.
Absolutely. It's a really beautiful thing, I think, of preserving that history through making work in the way that you do, because it allows people to engage with it in a way that they might not do otherwise.
And we don't want to be, you know, we're not aiming to be saccharine-coated nostalgia at all.
As one quick thing I wanted to say, I remember on one of the first shows that I came to, there was a lady that turned up that never went to theatre, had absolutely no interest at the Canal Museum in King's Cross, and she brought with her these original black and white photographs of her family living on the canals. And it was such a special moment to bring theatre to somebody that would just never have engaged with it were there not some aspect of it linking her history into it. And I think that was a really poignant moment for me, at least.
We had a few of those. Regularly people would come and tell us about their families.
Yeah, and because our the shows that we do are based on real people, real stories. It does, yeah, draws stories out of people who come to the shows. So it sort of perpetuates the storytelling, which is really important. People are so important. And what we do is based on oral history.
And I think also I'm sure I remember you saying that a lot of these oral histories are so important because a lot of the families that lived on the canals didn't necessarily know how to read or write. So the actual kind of written histories don't exist in the same way as the stories do that have been passed down. So it really is a case of keeping those alive.
And it was mostly because it had nothing to do with intelligence. It was simply that they didn't get much chance to go to school.
What do we see as the next steps of moving forward for Alarum?
For Alarum, we're going through a period of just sort of re-establishing who we are, because I think it's an important thing for any company to do, and just taking the opportunity of having a little bit of money from the Arts Council and a bit of a pause because of the pandemic, to just think about what our next steps are. And certainly one thing that we'll do is to use all of the wealth of material that we've got from research and interviews from ID Canals to create some sort of performance, whatever that might be. Hopefully we'll be back live on the waterways as we were before next year. But in the meantime, yeah, we're finding other ways of sharing things as people are. We've never would have done this had it not been for the pandemic. So it's all exciting, really, as to the possibilities of what we could do.
I think I would say if we use all the wonderful material we've got from ID Canals, we will be creating something the length of Hamlet, uncut.
Just sort of the Lord of the Rings.
So much. We also think about audio drama, because one of the things that's been interesting about this time is the way that so many people have now, I mean, most of us hadn't heard of Zoom, had we, a few months ago? And now even people who would traditionally have said, no, I don't do any of that sort of technology, are using video calling because it's how they're staying in touch with their grandchildren and their family. So there's that reach. And when we, a few weeks ago, when we launched the book for ID Canals and the short film about it, which was going to be an event at Dudley Canal Tunnel Trust, and they've been very kind in offering a space, and we were going to have this lovely thing, pour everybody a glass of wine. But I doubt we would have had nearly 75 people taking part, but because it was online and more people could access it. So I think there is that. I've been interested in audio drama for a long time, so I would very much like to, that part of what we might produce is, we've enjoyed making the podcasts, so having some of that sort of material for the group and Waterways Arts. Our role has really been to sort of provide the starting, the nurturing, if you like, because to get it going, to get any funding and do something, you have to have at least, one organisation that can look after the money. So I think we see our role as sort of benevolent parents, really, and hopefully in a couple of years, people within the group will be ready to say, okay, we're ready to take this on and take it forward and turn it into something amazing. Well, it's pretty amazing already, but more amazing.
It's just going to carry on growing and growing and growing.
Yeah.
9 times.
And we hope very much that you'll be there at the front on your white Charger, helping to make it all happen.
I hope so too. So that was the first podcast with Waterways Arts. We would like to interview more people about the work they're doing and talk about your interest in the canals and the waterways and what you'd like to see happening. Essentially, as we've talked about, it's about opening up dialogue and sharing resources. So if you're interested in talking about your work, please do get in touch. Otherwise, thank you very much for listening in.